This is incredible.
Such a great idea.
How did you come up with this?
It's practically genius.
I'm Lindsay McGuire.
And I'm Ryan Greaves. And this is Practically Genius, an original show from FormStack.
If I'm allowed one soapbox in life, this topic may be the one that I choose. Eliminating paper. Because it sucks. I have endless stories about the inefficiencies I've experienced as a customer of organizations who haven't moved past paper processes yet. And I know you probably have some too. Think about it. When was the last time you went to the doctor's office and didn't have to fill out some sort of paperwork, even if you've been a patient there for years or even decades? You know, some people like their doctors a lot. That's why I couldn't be more excited to have Denise Davis here with me. Denise is the Corporate Director of Marketing Technology and Operations at Emory Healthcare, a Georgia-based healthcare system with 11 hospitals and more than 250 provider locations. One of Denise's largest efforts at Emory has been eliminating paper processes in order to improve the patient experience. In this conversation, she's sharing exactly how her team is doing it, how you can start, and why this is crucial for you to think about now. Here's Denise. Denise, thank you so much for joining us today on Practically Genius. First off, tell me a little bit about your role at Emory Healthcare. I know you've been there for nearly a decade now.
Yes, it felt like a couple of weeks ago, and then I turned around and 9 years went by. I am the corporate director of marketing technology and operations. I am the first in the marketing department to hold this specific role. And I often refer to myself as the chief marketing mechanic because it's a little easier for people to get their heads around. I have in this role built out a team that I absorbed the web team, and I also pulled together budget operations and project management and CRM, and have been weaving the ties between CRM and web and getting people to think about the interactivity that they are not two different sides of the house, but they are actually combined very powerful tools. So that's been a lot of the work that I've been doing over the past 4 years.
I really appreciate the breakdown of the marketing mechanic because, titles can be arbitrary and confusing and hard to understand. Why do you think Emory Healthcare decided to have a role like this? What led your organization to elevating this title and role?
I think in part, they felt that CRM was the direction we needed to go to level up on marketing, to start moving towards one-to-one personalization. But also, I know for a fact that my boss, the vice president of marketing, saw CRM as a way to really grab data that the marketing department did not have access to itself. We were usually reaching across aisles, usually to operational or clinical teams who were very busy. And I don't think most healthcare organizations, they get it, but they don't quite appreciate the nuances and the subtle differences in marketing data versus clinical and operational data. And so, the idea that we just ask the call center for call data is fine, but their tools are aligned to or built to measure service levels and volume. They're not built to track campaign tactics driving those calls in. And so when you start to show people what you can capture through web forms and call tracking software and then match it up to patient records, you can start showing these really interesting stories, not only, ROI and contribution margin, but how people are flowing in and how they're behaving. And that is really, I think, what my boss envisioned. I envisioned that we would not be able to help the organization make better decisions about its marketing, what they were asking of us as a marketing department, without showing them our data, not data siphoned and sort of repurposed from other areas.
And I will ask real quick if we can silence notifications on computer real quick.
Okay. Oops. Hold on. Let me see if I can.
Or just turn down volume. Either one will make me happy.
Okay, I'm afraid where are the, let me try this. Okay, I think I got them.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Perfect. Yes, I think that makes a lot of sense. I am all about trying to find ways to use one tool across different departments in one organization, but there's also the case where you do need those specific tools to gather that very specific data to be useful. So now I want to shift a little bit into talking about paper. So I know Emory has done a lot to eliminate paper and make that a priority. So can you talk a little bit about why Emory has been on a mission to eliminate paper?
Yeah, and extends well beyond marketing. It comes down to scale. At a certain point, there just aren't enough human hands to lay on all the paper we could possibly produce. And also data integrity. The transfer of that data, which is very time consuming. Also, it introduces opportunities for errors in the data to make it impossible to report off of because you have so many different ways. And we have spent a ton of time normalizing our location addresses because street spelled out versus ST period. Pulling those into software, those are different locations unless you've got really, really superior AI software that can come through that. So it became a way for us to better serve our patients and our referring physicians by freeing up the time our people spend letting them work at the top of their licenses. If they're doing data entry, then they're not nursing, right? Or if they're doing data entry, then they're really not being that smiling face at the front desk who can help the patients navigate their appointment or make them feel comfortable when they walk in the door. Definitely in our call centers, if they have to rekey referral forms that are coming in from other physicians, there's a tremendous amount of downtime that produces in their agents, and they can't facilitate the actual referral appointments. The world got really big, and we consolidated a lot of small practices into really big health systems, and it's just the sheer volume of data coming in is completely impractical on paper.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in our 2022 State of Digital Maturity Report, we actually found that more than 2/3 of organizations have an initiative to eliminate paper, which I think is super exciting, especially because, like you've said, it just causes so many issues, both internally from like an employee experience standpoint, but also from a customer experience standpoint, and causing those other issues that can trickle down into your business. And now I know you talked about a lot of reasoning for moving away from paper, going more into digital, but were there any either kind of really big trends you saw across your different locations and organizations, or was there just one instance where you're like, now's the time, we need to do this? Was there a light bulb genius moment for you to be like, this is enough?
Yep, I will say COVID. Right? So every piece of paper that was touched was a potential transfer, right? Even though they said that it was really not transferable. Let's not leave it up to chance, but also in COVID, our organization at least took the opportunity or made the decision to really enhance our electronic medical health record system, and that forced a commonization. We had a lot of deviation in the forms we were producing. We have like hundreds of pages on our website with PDF patient questionnaires and not one of them were the same, and they were all asking for the same information. And I think that was where we, as an organization, said, okay, let's stop and let's not make our patients fill out their name 15 times. We know their name by now. So it was, again, it was a lot of some COVID-driven issues, but also I think we hit a critical mass to where we just had to make the shift, and in becoming more patient-centric and developing this sense that we know our patients, to not repeat questions we should already know the answer to, which is easier when you commonize forms, digital or paper, but much easier in a digital format.
Yes, it makes me think of our big paper ad campaign we did, and one of them is at a doctor's office, and the woman is literally talking about how I've filled out 15 different forms for you, and I've given you the same 10 pieces of information throughout those 15 forms. So I think you bring up a really relative point to a lot of organizations, a lot of people. And when I'm trying to think about the scope of the work that Emory had to do to achieve this, where did you start? Like, what was the first priority on your list when you decided now is the time to digitize, now is the time to rid ourselves of paper?
I think the push started, and it really started in our in the operational teams. Some of our chief clinical directors really, I think, heard their patients a few years ago. I think we've been trying to do this for a while, but again, in our organization, the shift in our core software opened up an opportunity to say, no mas, we're ending paper as much as possible. As you know, there's always going to be an analog backup, or you got people who can't do digital, but that truly shifted the focus to really, that opened a huge window of opportunity to get, I think, executive backing, plus to empower the clinical teams to really enforce a level of commonization and digitization, if that's a word that I just made up, but also to really think through not just that, but really think through asking those questions, because on paper, I think you could ask a question in a way that you can't in a digital. You got to be very concise, and you got to let them click a button. You can't do a lot of free text, right, and open-ended questions, which is where some of the arbitrary answers or maybe the misinformation comes in, and you can't report on these wide open free text boxes or just self-attestations. It really helps speed up the form if it's a yes, no, if it's a multi-select. So it not just making the forms digital, but streamlining what we're asking, and really being judicious about how many questions we're confronting them with. Because in reality, even when it was on paper, every answer or question we were asking of them, that was one more piece of data we had to enter into something. And so it just forces you to streamline and be mindful of what you really need to ask them in a form.
Yeah, that has been a common theme in a lot of the interviews this season, is really narrowing down what data is crucial to your systems and processes and customer. I know in a recent episode, perhaps Joe brought up this idea that if you're collecting this data, but you're never using it ever, that is useless data. So cut that out of your systems. So I'm interested in when you started realizing, now is the time to not only go digital, and digitization is a word, ding, 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 you got it right. But beyond that, when you started thinking about how can we streamline these, how can we make them more efficient, make it so that we're asking only what we need. Who was in on those decisions? How did you decide what data was relevant and what really was unnecessary?
Again, I'll give huge props to some of the clinical directors in our what we call our physicians group practice and in the hospital systems, as I think they suffered through the pain and had to hear it firsthand from the patients what they were frustrated with. We have a patient family advisor group who regularly gives us feedback based on, here's what my experience was in your health system, here's what I think you should change. But I think it was just enough data that they, and also they went out and learned from others who went ahead of them. This whole idea of, you at least 60% of the people who are going to complete your form are going to do it on an iPhone or on some mobile device, and how easy is it to complete that form on a phone versus at a desktop with a full keyboard. So I have to give them a lot of credit for listening to the patients, doing due diligence, really looking across the universe of the other health systems and getting best practices and just leaning into good UX design. They just pulled the right people together, a lot of cross-functional teams together, and then really I'm on this great patient questionnaire governance committee, really guiding each of the clinical sections through a set of best practices and coaching them through the best way to ask questions, and then even commonize the way we ask the questions. So it's been a labor of love over a number of months and years, but I think it's really going to pay off for everybody involved.
That's a really powerful story, and I think a really strategic way to go about that. And I also really love that you brought up the idea of standardizing questions, because especially with larger healthcare organizations, you can have one chain here, one branch here, one location here. And if that standard of care varies across those locations and those nurses and doctors and frontline staff, that can cause some churn. And if you have an unsatisfactory or a different experience at one location compared to another, being able to have some control over that. And I think in a way that probably a lot of people might not be thinking of, the impact of just standardizing something as simple as a form can have like a huge impact. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think that's where, we're an academic medical system. So there's a lot of data we want to capture to analyze and help inform the next generation of treatments and healthcare and clinical trials. And if those forms, if that intake is not consistent, we lose the opportunity to really look across the population we treat. And again, population health and healthcare is a big deal. And again, data hygiene is huge. And it's also, when you look at the cost of healthcare, the cost of opportunities lost in data that isn't clean, and the cost of rework or additional work because the data isn't there in an accessible format, that all adds up. And so there's that behind that. And again, the customer experience, if I don't have to answer that question 5 times, I'm a happier person. We get closer to, we hope, a Hilton or Delta experience where it really feels like we know them. We should know them. We should know this stuff about them.
Yes, I totally agree. And it's interesting to know the gaps that still exist. I remember a while back, I was going to my primary care physician because I had some shoulder issues and was trying to figure out what was my next step of care. And it was my annual physical, and I hadn't done one in 3 years because of COVID. And I remember that my doctor had to request some kind of form or information or sign off from my OBGYN, but yet they're in the same network. They work in the same healthcare organization. And I was just mind blown of that's not only a poor experience for me as a customer and a patient, but also think about how annoying that is for that doctor to have to go through that extra step, that extra screen. And again, going back to the cost of healthcare, that trickles down, and those impacts are massive.
Yeah, and it creates a lot of interruption. It's so easy for us to not take care of our wellness because it's a hassle. And it's because of those interruptions in the process where we have to, like, the handoff isn't clean, right? And so I think that's what we are all trying to do in healthcare, is really make that flow more seamless for our patients so they can really maximize, the investment in their care, in their self-care is realized, because you do feel like you're slogging through a very, just to make a dental appointment because I had to cancel one, right? But that's the holy grail for all of us. And two, I go back to so many smaller systems were absorbed into larger health systems, and we all felt like everybody was doing it the best practice and didn't want to let go of our own processes. And sometimes you just sometimes yours is the best practice, but sometimes it's not, and you gotta let go of that. So, but yeah, even some of the transition between referrals and getting people appointments is, again, if it's done in a PDF form, or God forgive us, a fax.
Oh, buddy.
Right? I just said that word in the year of our Lord 2022. But yeah, it's not working. So we're leaving that hopefully behind.
But sadly, that is the reality of that still does happen. And we even found, again, in that report I had mentioned, we found that a lot of organizations that have not moved to these digital workflows or these digital papers or digital forms, digital paper, I guess that's right too. But those who have not digitized yet, the number one reason they haven't is because this is the way we've always done things. So I don't think you're incorrect in that idea that there is this huge resistance to change, and especially in the healthcare field. It just seems like it's harder to make those changes because, generally speaking, they are larger organizations with so many moving pieces, different kind of work, like different jobs and functions and departments. And so it's wild that we do still have to say, like, fax that to me in this world, and hopefully at some point that will go away. And I think it's. Oh, go ahead. Oh no, you go ahead.
Two, I mean, when you're in a healthcare environment, they develop a groove, right? So they have these processes that they followed, and if they have to change the flow of their motion, it really does mess up their day. So that switch from an easy pull a folder off the shelf and flip it open and look at a review to sit down to a computer, pull up the screen, get to the right, that was enough that it was really like, that's huge. But I think the benefit, I'm starting to see that even over the years that had this is becoming the way we're doing it now. And so, the idea too in healthcare, there is a big question mark always about that HIPAA data out in the cloud, or how do you secure it? And paper felt like we knew we could secure paper, we think, although I know for a fact that was probably a myth. But there was also, again, that idea that, I would say, that adversity to change, even in my team in marketing, taking it back to marketing, the idea of building forms to capture campaign data, there was resistance in my team because that was a new skill and it was harder. And I'm like, good, we'll get rid of something else, but we got to do this. And so let's look at where we optimize in other areas. I agree with you. It was just, we like our grooves.
And speaking of that resistance to change, that's another topic I think that we've talked a lot about this season, is overcoming that resistance to change and figuring out ways to have empathy with people as you're making these sometimes really massive digital transformations. So how have you kept momentum either on your team, your department, across your organization as you've done some of these bigger digital transformation projects?
I think I've watched on our clinical teams that as they've been going through their transformation, the realization of how much band-aiding, bubble gumming, and baling wire they have put in place to accomplish a thing versus making the change, and they're starting to see like, oh my God, this could be easier for everybody, and that is a nice thing for them to see on the horizon. It's gonna, every change introduces hiccups, headaches, heartaches, and hernias, but the reality is that these changes are probably undoing a lot of painful practices we just kind of coped with. On my team, it was, I think now that we're able to tell these great data stories, and I think that will happen too elsewhere in the organization, when you streamline these processes, when you digitize this, when you make the data more fluid and accessible and clean, you can start to see really interesting stories that open up your world and change the way you think about stuff and shift your preconceptions, and that is exciting. I've watched the team really have these light bulb moments, and that in and of itself creates this desire to let's push it one more step, let's clean it up one more time, let's see what else we can shift into this so that we can do more, better, bigger, badder in this direction. It's it begets more a momentum once you start to see the results.
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point, because sometimes it can be hard to visualize if you can't see it or demo it or even feel it, depending on, what situation you're trying to achieve or solution you're coming up with. But I will say you should copyright that bubblegum phrase, because that was genius. I loved that. And I don't know if that's a common phrase or not, but yes, that is a great way to talk about going back to this idea of these paper systems that I think people get comfortable in them because they're the way we've done them for forever. We know they work, quote unquote, but they don't necessarily work well. But a lot of the times we just don't take the time to consider, how could it work better? How could we reimagine this? What is wrong with the system that worked for 20, 30, 40, however many decades and years? How have you seen paper processes get in the way of efficiency?
It comes down to data entry, right? And it comes down to, it's really hard over an institution of 28,000 people to commonize a thing like we're going to write street out, or we're going to abbreviate it ST period, or we're going to abbreviate suite as STE. And when it's left up to physically writing this out on paper, or even typing it into a interactive PDF form, which are great, they're lovely, they really are, but they're still almost like an intermediary between paper and the actual digital form. You just get so much unclean data and inconsistency when you don't allow. The beautiful thing about these form builders is that they can enforce some of those data entry standardizations, and that just takes the noise out of what you're collecting and what you're trying to analyze. We had an instance where I'll give you an example, in locations, when we were setting up our practice locations, we'd have all kinds of different variations of how those locations were entered in. So when we tried to create a automated system that pulled those locations in from a database, they had been entered into that database so many different ways that we went from 250 locations to like 2,000 locations because there were that many variations in the spelling of street, avenue, suite, Northeast versus Atlanta GA versus Atlanta Capital GA. So that was the cost. That was the cost of not being able to automate because data was keyed in or entered in a non-standardized way, often because a piece of paper was filled out first.
That is absolute insanity, I will start off with.
Trust me, that was what my team dealt with.
I don't know how you went through it and survived and are here talking with me right now. But I think it's like those small things that you just don't think about in the context of how will this have an impact on this process or system. But once it's started and begun, it can spin out into this huge issue. And I mean, that is so much cleanup on the back end. So being able to put those processes in place that can act as guardrails. And, for the paper advocates, I don't know if there are any out there. And if you're listening and you are a paper advocate, just have a conversation with me. Please tell me your case. But for the paper part of it, you can try to put as many like rules and steps and directions as possible in that paper. But a lot of the time, these situations, people are late or they don't really want to read all of these things on this piece of paper. So they're just going to put down the data they think you want, and you're still not going to be able to control it. But as you said, having those instances through digital processes and systems and tools where you can actually state, yes, it has to be this way, and control it to only being that way. That's so powerful.
Well, and I have to give credit to the software developers too, like, the form stacks, in making the shift. It's a lot easier, the shift to codeless forms. I remember back in, I should not say this because I'm aging myself, but, forms were they were easy on the HTML end, but on the back end to really make them work, they were not, not everybody loved them, and they were not always easy to do depending on how your environment was set up. And so I will say that the software manufacturers have come a long way in making this type of digitization and this move away from paper easier for people who were reluctant to do it. My team never liked building forms, and now we get into our tool and we're like, oh my God, this is fun. Like, let's play in here. And so, it really makes us think about how we can use that tool to even solve other problems beyond I can't say that word today, but to solve other business problems that aren't even just forms, but are a way to programmatically trigger a thing through a web interaction. So we talk about getting away from paperless forms, but the form is a pretty powerful interface tool in a digital experience platform, which is what we're really building now with websites.
So first off, I want to point out, she said form building can be fun. So everyone pay attention. It can be fun. And I will point out that Emory Healthcare is a FormStack customer, so it can be fun. But you do bring up a really funny point, which is the probably some listeners might not even know any of this backstory, but FormStack was founded more than 15 years ago because our founder, Aday, realized that people had such miserable experiences building forms. It was tedious, it was time-consuming, it was not fun. And so he, way back before no code, quote unquote, was even an idea or a topic, had the idea to make a no-code form builder. So it's interesting to see how far we've come since that point in time, but yet that still is the crux of a lot of organizations making this switch away from paper and coming to a tool maybe somewhat like FormStack, because it does relieve so many of those other barriers to entry, like you said.
Yeah, branching logic prior to tools like this was, you really needed, you needed a pretty, kind of a sick ticket programmer, because it wasn't fun. They really, I think everybody even when we did printed forms, no graphic designer loved to build forms, right? So translate that to the web, the web world, and nobody really loved to build forms. But I will say that these tools allow you to think more about the problem you're solving and less about having to code every little thing. So you're in the, I like to say marketing is business, and we are in the business of solving, business hurdles. And these types of tools really empower us to help solve things that we haven't been able to do in the past easily.
And I want to dig into that just a little bit, because I think one thing that we talk a lot about is this idea of how can you innovate and truly innovate. And especially in healthcare, I think we see a lot of innovation as far as what you can do in surgeries and recovery. But then when you go into that customer experience, the patient experience, there's still a lot of realms that I think organizations can innovate. So how has Emory been able to innovate by moving away from paper and into a more digital front door environment?
Well, and this predated FormStack, and of course there were a lot of form intake systems that aren't FormStack that are used on the clinical system, just, to be fair and transparent. But, we, in developing the CRM through form building, helped with the COVID vaccination efforts at Emory. Teaming up with our clinical teams and our patient access team, that ability to build forms quickly that could send data in, and we could match people up and get people appointments. We did that with several other COVID-related vaccination delivery projects, and we're also using the forms to, I would say, also in areas like population health gap closure. And again, it's as simple as capturing the level of interest. Yes, please call me back about this. The interesting thing is you can schedule online, but sometimes online scheduling doesn't allow you to ask the questions you need to ask, so a request appointment form is still necessary. So there are a lot of, I don't even think, we think through things all the time. I think we are now working with a couple of clinical teams to figure out how to build forms to help them fit patients who need availability in certain programs and help them, guide them better so they're not playing a long game of phone tag with the system. So it's it's interesting. When I came into healthcare, marketing and the call centers didn't talk much, but now this ability to capture interest, either in leads or I'd like to talk to somebody about an appointment, starts to bring us together to create this connected digital experience that didn't exist. It's pretty mind-blowing for people coming in from outside of healthcare, but it's been a relatively recent effort in a lot of healthcare systems to merge these two business units together.
Yeah, uniting those two areas can have such an impact, not only internally with how you're able to have that data access and they're able to see how you're communicating and interacting with patients, but also just thinking from, if I were to call my customer service line at my doctor's office and them being able to connect the dots across my patient journey, that can be a huge game changer. Huge game changer.
Well, yeah. And even the simple, we often ran, bring it straight back to marketing. We ran marketing campaigns, and we really could never tell. We could sort of make correlations between our campaigns and what was coming into the call centers. We couldn't say definitively, but now with forms, we can tell exactly what's driving them in. We can make decisions. We can do more A/B testing. It makes us more nimble, and we're able to react faster to we built forms that we weren't seeing conversion on, and we realized that in mobile, the form dropped to the bottom of the page. And, oh, by the way, now we can see that if we flip them to the top of the page, we'll get better conversion. So even solving the business problem of being better marketers and being better stewards of those dollars is significant. It seems like a simple thing, but is actually, I think, helps us build a more meaningful funnel, not just for our own purposes, but to really, if people are trying to find us, we're building a more streamlined funnel to get them in the front door.
Yeah, and even to the point of accessibility as well, I think, too, of being able to see where those issues are, those kind of hidden potholes and bumps in the road. And now going back to the paper discussion, for whether it's a healthcare organization or any other industry or vertical, for an organization that is trying to eliminate paper, is early in their process of eliminating paper, or maybe even hasn't started because there's a lot out there, how would you guide that organization in getting started? What's your advice of how do you just even start?
I really think, there are a couple of ways you could approach it, and it depends on where you are in your path or where you are. Sometimes it's as easy as we've got a real near-term problem we have to solve, and you start with that near-term problem, right? Or you have an opportunity to sit down and take an inventory or do a value stream analysis of how much time you're spending doing it in a paper format, and then you can look at, there are definitely tools out there that can, like FormStack, that can help you make it far easier to take your work streams out of paper. But it's really, I think you start to feel it. I think you start to feel where the inefficiencies lie, and that your 3 front desk people have to spend 3 extra hours a day keying in data isn't best time spent, and it creates burnout. And in the Great Resignation, everything we can do to eliminate employee burnout is a good thing. So I think it's really like listening, kind of like when we say listen to your bodies. You start to know when you are something's not right. You can sort of stop and listen to your processes and know there's a better way to do this. It really shouldn't take this long. I often tell people, if it feels like it should take 20-30 minutes and it's taking 2 to 4 hours, then stop and examine the process, right? But then, do your due diligence on your tools. What tools are going to be the best fit for you and your organization in terms of ease of use and cost of entry and total cost of ownership. And very important, one of the reasons why we went with FormStack is its interoperability with our CRM and the ability to write a lot of hooks into other systems. So it's okay, even if you're building a form that spits into an Excel file, that Excel file has to go somewhere, right? So you really have to think about how you connect your data, your in-tech data, and what your connection points really need to be. Look for what we call the minimum viable product. Don't try to boil the ocean, but look for your use cases that you can most easily take down, but then make a significant impact. And that's why I sometimes think if you try to do it all in one comprehensive, let's do a huge inventory, let's do all these value stream analysis, I think you often find that there is one particular pain point that is really just messing up your day. And if you can solve for that one and just keep an open mind about how you can transfer what you learn and what you solve off of that one, you can use that and move forward in your other use cases.
Yeah, that listen to the process tip, that is such a great way to encompass a lot, I think, of what I've talked with guests about on this show, of being able to take the time to really see where are the issues coming from. And, you know, he didn't say it, but I think it's clear that paper is a big issue. But I think just being able to take that time, and you even like sighed as you said it, like listen to the process. We try to, I think it's probably a little bit of human nature, but we try to push the problems under the rug. We try to not see them, not think they're as big as they are, but sometimes we really do have to take that moment to listen to the process. What is that big pain point that is causing this? Like you said, it should be half an hour maybe, and it's hours. And we found that in our own research. In that digital maturity report, we found that 51% of employees are spending at least 2 hours each day on repetitive tasks and manual work. And that's insane. So great points there.
And it goes back to what you were saying, is we get into the, people like their comfort factor and their groove, but I think you then have to look at your opportunity cost, right? We will often say we just don't have time. And it's like, but how much time are you wasting by doing it longhand, right? And so if you could just carve out space to make that change, what you will free up over time is going to be huge. You're going to get such a benefit out of it. We do that all the time internally on my team. Is if it feels like a problem, but we're not giving ourselves permission to work on it, let's think about that and figure out how to give ourselves permission to work on that problem.
And how do you make that more of a habit? Because I think that's something you need to train yourself to do, and a lot of people probably struggle with.
Well, we Emory is my institution is going through has embraced lean, and so we do a lot of continuous improvement. We always are looking. I don't think everything needs a fishbone analysis or a value stream analysis. I mean, you can make those incremental improvements, but I do think we stop and say what's working well, what isn't, and try to build in time to, one, really assess the problem and think through. Not over the top, like we don't want to over engineer the solution or get real fancy, but what do we got within our own tool set and our own, what we're empowered to control? What can we do to move this forward? What are the simple tweaks we can make? Sometimes it's really easy. Sometimes it's the paperclip solution. Sometimes it just requires people outside of us, and that's where you have to start doing your cross-functional negotiations and socialization, but we look at probably on a weekly to monthly basis at the end, and especially at the end of every project, what worked, what didn't work, what could we do better, what do we need to train people on. Hey, we keep having this QA problem, what can we do to prevent that problem from happening? So it's just it's as much a routine of you don't want to be in a constant change state, because then that's destabilizing as well, but you do want to have an open mind and be constantly curious is what I would say, and I will say my team is extremely good at that. I made them be good at it. I hired them to be good at it.
And it means you're a good hiring manager as well. And the curiosity fuels optimization, I believe. And so I think at the end of the day, it really is about putting in, like you said, those practices and habits to allow you to stay curious and stay in not an area of change, but of optimization for sure. Well, yeah. Denise, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say in healthcare really is, well, it's always in continual improvement because that's the nature of healthcare. You're always looking for new and better treatments, less invasive treatments, but even in our own little corner of the world, there's always an opportunity for just one small change that can make something better. And so I just urge people to keep their eyes out for that.
And on that note of being on the lookout for that one small change or that one tiny tweak, I think that relates back really to this idea of practically genius, and that there are people all throughout organizations who have these maybe tiny sparks of ingenuity, and then they're able to go and figure out a way to implement that throughout either their team, their department, their whole entire org. What do you think drives those people? What do you think enables them to have these practically genius moments?
I think it's the drive to have an impact, right? And some people just love to problem solve. Some people like to stay in the pattern, but some people just really like to, they look for those opportunities to find a better way, or to, in my own personal life and professional life, I lived for those moments where someone said, "Oh my God, thank you. That was life-changing. That simple thing you did for me was life-changing. It gave me 3 weeks back." That's what fueled me. That's what got me out of bed. And so I think there are people like that. And if you're looking to initiate these kinds of changes, you want to make sure you do have people like that on your team, or find people who you can bring onto your team who just want to innovate and who want to see if they can push it further.
I think that is excellent advice to close this episode out. Denise, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. You have a great day.
All right, I'm going to hit stop recording.